Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. For those who were here last time, you can tell my producer's back because things are pretty again, not just my pretty face. Welcome, and glad to see we have a few people here who I recognize. And I'm not going to say hi immediately. As always, I will be answering questions. You can bring up topics. I have a couple of things already I can talk about because a couple of people did um, send some things in. In fact, one of them was something left over at the end of last time's session, which I'll come to in a bit. But also, I want to mention what's going on for the rest of the year. So I'm back in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks, and in 6 weeks. So we have three more shows for the year. Two in December and one more in November. The November show will be on the 23rd, then 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that. Last one's going to be the 21st of December. At that point, we will be skipping 3 weeks and resuming on January 11th with my first guest ever. So I'm going to be doing a guest show. We'll have two of us talking, and that guest will be Steve Gonzalez, whose name you may know from Ghost Hunters, from the TV show Ghost Hunters. I've had communication with Steve over the years. He is knowledgeable about parapsychology. You couldn't tell that from the TV show, but he is, and is a good guy. So we'll be talking about a lot of things, including just generally reality TV, parapsychology, and ghost hunting, of course. That's going to be January 11th. And if that works out, I might start inviting some of my other colleagues to join us from time to time to see, some of them might have things they want to talk about. We'll see how that goes. All right. So as people are coming in now, first thing I think I'll talk about, and I don't see the person who asked the question. So Mary Prankster, when she gets here, we'll use her question. I just want to make sure she hears. And the question I got from a colleague of mine in the UK, he's over in Edinburgh, and he watches the replay of this podcast because it's a little late at night for them in the United Kingdom. And he asked me to talk about physical mediumship and a couple other elements of that. So I think since we've talked about mediumship here, we haven't really talked. I've talked occasionally about physical mediumship. Physical mediumship is a very, very specific form of mediumship, which has alternative definitions. I know there's at least one medium I know of who says that she's a physical medium. That's not, but she is describing it as she feels things in her body physically. That doesn't fit the traditional meaning of physical mediumship, even from a spiritualist perspective, let alone from a parapsychology perspective. So she can do whatever she wants, but it's not physical mediumship. It's just simply a way of, some mediums hear things, some mediums will see things, some mediums smell things, all of that. Okay, physical mediumship. It's really what a lot of mediumship was in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. It is also that form of mediumship that was kind of showy and also subject to a lot of fraud, and it still is today. There are still physical mediums out there. One of the more famous ones who has been studied under controlled conditions, but when I get to the controls here, I'll talk about that. There's problems with that. Stuart Alexander, he's a British medium. He's got pretty high opinion. People have high opinion of him. There are others. And physical mediumship is that kind of mediumship where communication with the spirits involves typically going through another intermediary. So if a medium is an intermediary between the living and the dead, physical mediums use another intermediary. They often call it the control spirit, who is someone on the other side who facilitates either communication, which frankly is kind of rare, with other spirits, or facilitates physical activity in the seance room. Physical mediums work in the dark. This is where the ghost hunting thing comes from, by the way, for the darkness. And it's also the problem that we actually have with studying physical mediumship. Physical mediumship happens in the dark because over the years, early on, while there were physical mediums like Daniel Douglas Hume is the actual pronunciation of his name, spelled Home, Home, in the latter part of the 19th century. He was able to, in front of people, according to so many witnesses, including scientists, levitate himself in full light. He did not need darkness. He did a lot of other physical things, which he said came from the spirits empowering him. And that's the difference. Physical activity happens with physical mediumship in the seance room or in the room that is coming through the medium, but empowered by the spirits. And what happened in the late 19th century with physical mediumship is that more and more people went into the dark. The original Fox sisters, who kicked off spiritualism to begin with, were able to get communication through clicks and bangs and things like that. Physical mediums, physical things that everybody could hear. But as it moved into the seance room, and as stage magic developed around the same time, um, both sides, frankly, mediums, especially the phonies, some of the real ones who were not doing genuine stuff all the time, picked up stuff from the stage conjurers or magicians, and vice versa. And you ended up eventually with more and more recognition by the phony mediums that you could do a lot more in the dark or lowered light than darkness than you ever could in light with lights on. Consequently, the folklore arose that in order for spirits to do physical things, they would have to have darkness. Although sometimes they could produce things under a red light bulb. This creates problems for researchers trying to figure out what's going on. And in fact, people have done as much as to tie the medium down. I can tell you right now that doesn't work. I mean, it could work. I would say probably a straitjacket would work better as long as the person doesn't know escape artistry. But early in the world of spiritualism, there were a couple of guys, the Davenport brothers, who created what has become known as the spirit cabinet. They actually used a sort of cabinet. It was a framework with curtains, and one of them would be tied down to a chair. People would check the knots, all of that, and the other brother would call on the spirits and the one inside the cabinet before they close the curtain goes into trance. Curtain gets closed. Suddenly, a tambourine from inside the cabinet starts banging. A bell starts ringing. You open the curtain. The guy's still tied. You close the curtain. Sometimes things would fly over the top from outside. Open the curtain. The guy's still tied up. The Davenport brothers were magicians. They had figured out how to do this. And actually, I would recommend that you go to YouTube and run a search on Francis Willard, Spirit Cabinet. Incredible performance of the Spirit Cabinet. I've seen it live 3 times now in my lifetime, and it's amazing to me. And this is with the lights on, of course. But every medium started using the Spirit Cabinet. It's just like in the dark. They're still enclosed in usually some other small curtain, and stuff happens. In any event, because I want to get to some of these other questions, the problem for us in parapsychology, there's twofold problem, which is one is not a problem. Well, actually, it's a problem for evidence of spirit contact. And that is that unlike evidential mediums, such as the people we have for the Forever Family Foundation that Julie Beischel is working with in her research, who provide information that can be verified, that under conditions in which they could not possibly have known that information, there's been very little information that comes through the physical mediums. It's almost a show, like the spirits putting on a show. That's number one. So even if the medium says they're control spirit, the medium I saw, Kai Mugi from the Felix Circle in Germany, his spirit control was Hans Bender, a parapsychologist. He was doing his thing in this. Honestly, the room was really too hot, but it was for 4 hours before we kind of all gave up. And Hans Bender never once provided any information about his background, about parapsychology. He was a parapsychologist, well-known one. And there was nothing that indicated there was actually spirit contact at all. There was a lot of physical stuff, some of which one thing very clearly I saw was fraudulent because of the way it happened. But you see what happens is that, we have night shot cameras today. You see it on ghost hunting all the time. Most mediums, physical mediums, don't want night shot camera, and their rationale is that the infrared will hurt the spirits. That's what the spirits say. So no night shot. In actuality, some of these physical mediums have been caught because people have surreptitiously brought in night shot and shown that they've gotten out of whatever condition situation they were and they moved around and touched people and did other things. The other thing that my colleague Stephen Brownie pointed out is that even though people like Kai Mugi was able to do stuff under red light, it was an actual incandescent light bulb. It was not an LED. So the light bulb was hot. Heat is infrared. Actually, that light bulb could be measured to give off more infrared than the little tiny spotlight that's actually on a night shot camera. So that argument goes out the window altogether. Now, there is one group called the Skull Group, and you can look them up on YouTube, just do a Google search, use AI to find out about them. SCOLE, group of scientists who are communicating with dead engineers and scientists under controlled conditions, which have been taken to task, of course, by the skeptics who made assumptions about those conditions. We don't know, there has been information that came through. The Skull Group actually got a lot better controls but still in the dark, which makes it difficult to see what's going on. That's the real problem that we have. So there may be some good evidence from the Skull Group, but in general, physical mediumship, we can't, it can be fun or interesting to participate in one of the mediums, one of the seances, but we don't see that as good evidence of spirit contact at all. Yeah, night vision does make ghost hunting shows look creepy and easier to see flashing gadgets, which is why they're using night shot at all. That and the fact that the darkness thing was something that the TV shows initiated. As I've said before on other episodes of this podcast, prior to night shot cameras, I was doing TV and we were doing ghost hunting. And inevitably the director would want us to do it late at night with most of the lights out. In fact, there were a couple of people, field producers or directors, who basically said, can we turn the lights out? And fortunately, the cameramen are smart enough to say, if we do that, we can turn all the lights out, but not the spot on the camera, because if we turn it out, then all you're going to see on the screen, remember, TV is a visual medium, but all people at home will see is a black screen. So darkness was never the mode for anything other than to make things look creepy and spooky, and night shot camera kind of help with that. And consequently, you end up with this idea that everything has to be done in the dark, but the vast majority of ghost experiences people have happen with the lights on or during the daytime. So it's not that, certainly. All right, let me go to this question, scientific spirituality. Why is influencing objects with telekinesis easier when the object is right next to you? It seems that pure will without close proximity is much harder. Yeah, one of the reasons that seems to be is totally psychological. It's our biases and beliefs. It's the same thing that limits us with psychokinesis in general. For example, my late colleague, Martin Caidin, the science and science fiction writer, one of my mentors in many respects. Marty was an expert on aviation and space science. He was a consultant to NASA. He wrote the book that became the $6 Million Man and did a lot of other stuff, but he was able to move things. But he was very particular about what he could move. And a lot of that had to do with his bias from aviation. So, for example, he could turn, even under the strictest conditions, in one instance, the target, which was a little paper or foil pyramid sitting on top of a spindle, that was in an enclosure that the atmosphere was pumped out. This is at an archery company. So that even a remote control fan, little fan inside the enclosure turned on, could not move the actual target at all, couldn't spin it, do anything with it. Not enough air. He was able to turn he wasn't in the enclosure, he was outside. He was able to get that to turn. But when I talked to him about things like a ping pong ball sitting on a table, he said, well, there's friction. Friction and drag is what keeps a plane from taking off. So he just could not get past the idea that it didn't take any more thought, because we don't know if it's energy, we don't know um, if it's force or what's going on with that. It wouldn't take any more of that to move a ping pong ball than it would, especially getting it rolling, than it would actually one of these targets. So we have limitations, and that's been very clear in PK activity. It's one of the reasons why when we run a spoon bending party, two things can happen. Number one, people do not, because the way when it's run properly, people are having a goofy time and other people are bending things. And so you're getting past this idea of seeing something really weird. You are seeing something weird, but it's all in fun. That's called witness inhibition. This is something that psychologist Kenneth Batchelor, also a parapsychologist in the 60s, identified. The other is owning up to it. I'm doing it. In spoon bending, when these parties, people can always say, oh, I use my strength, even though the spoon might flop over on its own. So PK, psychokinesis, telekinesis, is always bound by our belief system and our internal biases about what we can do. And nearness seems to be one of those things, for sure. Mary Prankster, okay, you're there. All right. I'm going to get to your question from last week that we didn't get to, but you say, I've been thinking about night vision. I thought maybe the lights being off could help create a mental state, fear, that can cause a phenomenon to manifest more intensely. Well, this certainly wouldn't help if you're trying to contact a loved one. Fear is not a good state. Um, we are terrible observers in the dark. It certainly makes it easier for stuff to happen that we make a bigger thing of, for sure, as well. But people sometimes fall asleep in the dark. There's all sorts of things. It just doesn't help. Would not, there's nothing that would help with spirit communication in the dark. It would allow people to, of course, believe that something is happening. And you could even do that through suggestion, not even necessarily through physical action, for that matter. So let me go to your question from last week, Mary Prankster. All right, she lists, here's the question. Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis? Uh, UFOs, there are things in the sky. They're unidentified. I don't know what they are, but there's a lot of good evidence for something going on there, certainly. There's no question about that. In fact, I volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies under J. Allen Hynek when I was in college. Astral projection or out-of-body experience is something we have researched extensively in parapsychology. I've even had my own experiences. So yes, I believe in that. Telepathy, certainly there's plenty of evidence for that. I mean, telepathy is ESP. Clairvoyance is a form of ESP. Remote viewing is clairvoyance, real-time ESP. Spirit photography, not as much. That would be like EVP. If there's truly a photo of the spirit has to affect the camera or the actual film or recording medium in that way as well. And then telekinetic movement, I just talked about psychokinesis. Absolutely. I wrote a whole book on that called Mind Over Matter, which we're going to try to bring back into print in the next few months. Trance mediums, people do go into trance and allow others to speak through them. And there have been, usually it's just mild altered states, but there seems to be some evidence. There has been evidence for full trance mediums for folks to allow people to speak through them. Loch Ness Monster, I have no problem. I have no particular opinions either way on that, nor for Bigfoot. Probably more acceptance of Bigfoot than the Loch Ness Monster at this point. And theory of Atlantis, not so much. While there probably were other civilizations, as we're seeing now, pushing back the start of human civilization in Turkey and other places in the Middle East, further and further back, the idea of an advanced culture, there's not been that kind of evidence yet. And Atlantis, the first time it was mentioned was by Plato, and Plato mentioned it, telling a story of about Atlantis that he heard from somebody else. And the story goes back 300 years before, and there's really no good evidence for Atlantis. Again, there are some archaeological elements that are unexplained, and we need to look into them. But to say that connects to the mystical ideas or fantasy ideas about Atlantis, there's no really good evidence for that point. Okay. Back up. Paul Batista, you're a mentalist. You've seen Oz Perlman. Yes, I have. Oz Perlman is a great performer. No question. Um, no question at all. And then Kathy Nadal, who's one of our Forever Family Foundation meetings. Ron Nagy is terrific at Lilydale spoon bending. I will tell you something, Kathy, because you weren't there. A number of years ago, we had a Forever Family Foundation conference in Durham, North Carolina, and several of the mediums. We had a little thing at the Rhine Research Center, um, since we were kind of connecting to the Rhine at that time with several of the mediums. I believe Rebecca Lo Cicero was there. I know Laura Lynn Jackson was there. I can't recall who else was with us, but we did a little spoon bend. John Kruth did a little spoon bending thing with them, and Laura not only bent a lot of spoons there, but she was still bending stuff at the hotel later that night, and even at the restaurant the next night after the conference. And from what I understood, her husband was getting a little mad at her during the week after the conference because she was still bending stuff. So it's really kind of interesting um, how much what happens with folks. The spoon bending stuff is really interesting. It is a mindset, and I even had a colleague of mine ask if we could. He had a group that would discuss psychokinesis. Were people who had experiences. They wanted me to run a spoon bending party, but this was over Zoom during the pandemic, and I was dubious as to whether I could do this. The fact is that one of the elements that's necessary, it seems, the methodology was created by a guy named Jack Houck, who was an aerospace engineer for Lockheed. This is back in the late 70s. And part of it is getting out of your own way and actually getting up and moving around and being a little goofy. And other than the one guy who had his two daughters with him, so there's a long shot of them on Zoom, and they are doing that, nothing else was going on for people. They were just intently staring at their spoons and trying to get them. And that's not how it works. You got to let go. If you don't let go, PK doesn't happen. Big part of it. So if telekinetic influence is limited by psychology, I think we could remove the limitation through. I don't know about subliminal messaging or altered states. Certainly not where you're blindfolded. I don't think that would help. But I want you to think in terms of human performance in general, sports psychology. And actually, I had a conversation with a professor of sports psychology at John F. Kennedy University years ago. We sat down and talked about this because I was writing in my Mind Over Matter book about athletes. My dad was a TV sports producer, and I got to meet a lot of athletes and coaches and people like that over the years, professional and college. And there's a very much a similarity between the psychology of doing psychokinesis, that doubt, disbelief gets in the way kind of thing, getting into an altered state, a mild altered state. Hear about athletes talking about being in the zone when extraordinary things happen for them. Again, getting out of their own way. So there's a mild altered state induction we do for the spoon bending parties. You could do that. I don't see that a blindfold would help. I don't know that subliminal messaging would help, but there's other activities you can do for getting people riled up, you might say. And I think it seems to be that's a big piece of it. You don't have to get them active necessarily. When Martin Caden taught people to do PK, and I use his method once in a while, the thing that's limiting to us is when we think of pop culture imagery of people doing mind over matter, people doing telekinesis. You often get the image of the person concentrating really hard to the point sometimes their face gets red and they get this throbbing vein in their head. If you watch people actually doing PK, even spoon bending, the moments that the PK is happening, their faces are blank. I mean, it's like they suddenly become Mr. Spock, totally emotionless. They are watching, as somebody who's experienced this, it feels like you're watching what's going on, but you're not really there. It's this kind of dissociation piece, which comes and goes, but it's about focus and visualization, or just focus in what's the end point here. It's not about concentration. It's not about that at all. Totally. Bachelor in his conclusion that clearly observing the phenomena was inhibiting the effect. Okay, so that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I was going to say about Caden's method is that when people saw someone else doing it, it explodes. A lot of people do it. The first spoon that gets bent generates other people bending spoons and even more and more. Marty Caden and I did a session, a workshop at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was 93 or 94, probably 93. We had 102 attendees, including a lot of faculty members and people who are interested in the area. This was put on by the Fortean Research Center, the Charles Fort Research Center. And Marty did his discussion in the morning. He talked about how he learned to do all this. And he had people try. And one or two people could actually get some things going with their little paper wheels in front of them, their targets, their energy targets in front of them, psi energy targets. So that did happen for a couple people. And then Marty went on, and we showed some video, and we had people do it again. A couple people do it again. And once Marty did it, 52 of the 102 people did it. It was like opening a floodgate. And I've seen that happen in other circumstances. However, when I've done smaller group workshops with that methodology, you end up with a couple people who react in a way that Bachelor could have predicted. Where, in fact, I can just imagine, so picturing one of my students, she's got her arms on the table, but her hands are not close to the target. People are getting the targets to move a little bit. Her target spins once, and she does this. It freaked her out, and she was not able to move anything after that. That's called witness inhibition and ownership resistance. That's what Bachelor talked about. So witnessing PK doesn't, unless you're, what it does is it increases your disbelief, because now you question what you saw, actually can increase the odds of you doing it yourself, especially when you see there are no negative repercussions to doing it. So there's a whole psychology of that process that's there. Kathy, you were there too. Okay, I'm glad to see that. I couldn't remember who else was there at that point. So in sports psychology, in human performance psychology, I mean, people who doubt that they can do something or don't believe they can do something, we are our own worst enemies, especially if you start logically trying to take it apart and immediately react and say, that's not possible, or start looking for the fakery, which people sometimes do, or come up with alternative explanations. It's the heat of my hands causing that thing to turn. We can show you it's not. There's any number of things that one can do. And that's not to say that sometimes it's not the heat of your hands, but it's pretty easy to say that there are other things going on there. And yes, in spoon bending parties, some people are putting pressure on the spoons and physically bending them, kind of shock deformation in that. But what you do see also are, and I'll just tell you for what I normally do in those things is I tend to buy, frankly, partly because of expense, but also because it makes sense, cheap spoons, which are easy to bend, frankly, but they're so easy to bend and they're made of such cheap metal that when you bend them, they break. Go to your local dollar store and buy a couple of the cheap spoons that are there. And don't try to slowly bend the thing. Try to bend it quickly and see what happens. Try to bend it into a spiral in some way, shape, or form. See if you can do that without snapping the spoon. So, the heavier duty spoons are harder to bend, let's face it. But those will bend too. In fact, one of the early sessions I saw that Jack Houck was running, is running for us at John F. Kennedy University when we had our parapsychology program. There was a guy there who was pretty skeptical, but he did go into a decent altered state. He was kind of like, you could pass your hand in front of his face. And it was partly because of the visualizations Jack was teaching people. And at one point, Jack, because he was bending things and he's bending things. Yeah, it's my strength. So Jack hands him a 1 inch thick and 1 inch in diameter aluminum rod, solid. And with a little bit more induction, the next thing we know is the guy's twisted into a pretzel shape. And his explanation later on, by the way, we tried bending that thing ourselves. Without leverage, there's no way to do it. Even with leverage, it was tough. But his explanation was he was rubbing the rod so fast and so hard that the friction melted the insides of the aluminum rod and it softened the metal, allowed him to move it, to bend it. And I said to him, let me see your hands. He said, why? I said, let me see your hands. I said, where are the blisters? He's like, what are you talking about? It's like the melting point of aluminum is 1100 degrees. Go figure. Either you're a great psychic healer or what you just came up with is totally bogus explanation. So people come up with all sorts of weird explanations for stuff. If you can't move things during life, would that translate after being do it from the other side? That's a very good question. Number one, we have very few comparatively cases of apparitions, ghosts, capable of moving or choosing to move things. I don't know if it's capable or choosing. Very few. And usually, if the apparition, first of all, the majority of people who die and appear as apparitions, it's within the first week after death. In fact, it's normally within the first 24 to 48 hours, closer to the time of death. And it's appearing to people who knew them. That's the majority, like more than 90%. Then there are the few that might stick around and pop up every now and then. Then there are the ones that are the kind of the long-term residents, you might say, um, disembodied residents of places. And in those cases, sometimes after a time, and it's usually months to even years, you might see an evolution of physical activity happening. And then you might get a lot of fun physical activity that's there. So clearly there's something going on. Either they only then discover that they can do that, or that they had to learn how to do that. And I point you now to a scene in the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze. Admittedly, that book is based, the screenwriter used research from two books. One was by Scott Rogo, the other was my first book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists. But in that movie, the character Sam, who was murdered, is trying to do some trying to move something to try to get the attention of his fiance, Demi Moore's character. And he can't do anything. Then he's wandering around New York City and he's down in the subway and he sees this ghost running through the subway, knocking newspapers out of people's hands. And he corners the guy and he says, how are you doing this? And the guy says, well, I don't have a body. I don't physically can't do this. You have to think it to move. You have to focus on it and think it to move. In other words, psychokinesis is mind over matter, living or dead. There's the penny. That's correct. So, or if you watch the TV show Ghosts, Trevor's character has to really think and he does have to concentrate and focus really hard. But it really is about focus more than anything else. So it may be very, very well possible that all ghosts can do it. It's just they have to either want to do it or think about how to do it and learn to do it. Somebody has to advise them for that. But from the other side, this was where theoretically the physical mediumship would come in. Are spirits even present, and are they moving things is a hard question to answer when there's no evidence other than what the medium says. It's like they're not providing anything that indicates that there is a spirit present or that they're talking to your uncle or somebody else. Just nothing. And the one session I did with Kai Mugi, one of the people with me was a really good medium. And it was interesting, she sensed spirits around some of the attendees who were watching what was going on. And she even said that one of them was like left with a disgust look on his face, like couldn't believe the guy was doing what he was doing. But there was no evidence otherwise that, Hans Bender going through Kai Mugi did not tell us what spirits were there. We have no idea what was going on. If there is actual PK happening in physical mediumship, it is likely from the medium, the individual, not necessarily outside spirits, or maybe spirits working with them. But hard to know. We don't have any good evidence for that. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Do you believe energy vampires exist? Entities are human beings that steal people's energy or willpower. I wouldn't say willpower, but so there's no question. There are people who seem to for whatever reason, suck the life out of a room when they walk in the room. They bring the room down. And the question sometimes is not whether that's really happening. Um, Part of it is you have to look at them from a psychological perceptual perspective. Do they come in looking down and out, and is that somehow contagious? And most of the time, what the people I've met who do that don't look that way, and you still feel it, like something's being sucked out of us, and it seems to be kind of a pulling of energy or of emotion more than energy per se. It's not sucking the energy; it's the emotion. Emotion is energy in many respects. In that case, people we would call them a psychic vampire, and in this case, that's very negative. But there are people who suck negative emotions out of people. So you could walk into a place where people are grieving or people are really upset or depressed, and somebody walks in, not even smiling or laughing or being looking like they're in a positive um, state themselves, and all of a sudden the room brightens up. They have sucked the negative stuff out of people, out of the room as well. So that seems to be kind of a psychic ability that's there. The other thing is that they could be also projecting. So if a very depressed person walks into a room, whether they intend to or not, they could be projecting that emotion that people can feel, and that will drag you down. Or they could be projecting positive stuff. And again, that'll bring you up. Works both ways. Willpower, I think that's more of a psychological thing otherwise. And as far as entities, I assume that apparitions can potentially do that too, but we haven't seen that in things that have been reported to us. Um, yeah, season 5 on ghosts, it's multiple episodes already in there, in fact. All right, summer recall. There was a person in college I thought had coined the phrase energy vampire when dealing with them. You hadn't coined that. That had been around. And Michel Belanger, it's spelled Belanger, wrote a book on psychic vampires. I do encourage people to read it. And this is not about creatures. This is about people who unintentionally, most people unintentionally are like this in general. Now, on the plus side, if it's somebody who sucks negative emotion from people, that's a positive, practical application generally. If it's somebody who sucks the positive energy from people, there's plenty of people that can use that to their advantage, unfortunately. Scientific spirituality, maybe somebody not long ago made a video examining the observations of Barry Taff and creating a sophisticated theory. I'd be curious about that, certainly. I know Barry, and I talk to him every once in a while. Barry and I don't agree on every point, but poltergeist phenomena is from living people. The way we define poltergeist, the term poltergeist, it's often used in the UK and other parts of the world to describe any case with physical activity, but we like to separate from living agent stuff to, apparitional PK, just because the source makes a difference. Who's doing it for that? The being that feeds on grief and pain. If somebody feeds on grief and pain, again, if that helps people, sucking the pain from them, I think that's a good mechanism in some respect. Um, let's see, are witches and wizards just psychics, part of a particular religion culture? Someone told me witches are simply tree huggers and hippies. Well, it depends on what you mean by witch. In anthropology, a witch is someone who is born with an ability to do magic. A sorcerer is someone who learns to do magic. That's the difference in anthropology. In religion, witch has a very negative connotation, but the word witch, even going back thousands of years often, or variations of that, might be a label for people who were, often women who were root medicine people or healers or other folks. They were the shamans. Another term for shaman is witch. It has negative connotations thanks to what happened in the witch trials and the witch hunts throughout Europe. And, it's all part of the reaction of religion to people being at all different. It was also used as a label for people to be land grabbing and getting rid of people who might be otherwise a drain on what they thought were a drain on society. getting too old and infirm. They were either ill or had some sort of um, disabilities, and there were many people who were burned at the stake or hanged because someone wanted their land and there was nobody to protect them. So it really depends what you mean by that. Psychics have certainly been called witches, of course, as well. Let's see, but Wicca, or at least modern witchcraft, modern Wicca, was a resurrection of a pagan religion, and many people who call themselves witches are practitioners of Wicca, which is a nature, more or less a nature pagan religion. It's man, it's not harmful to anybody, but it does involve psychic ability too. So read up on that on Wicca. Mary Prankster, just because you're watching the Outsider series. Okay, yeah, just talked about that. The course on survival at the Rhine. I don't know about new courses. We're going to be doing the human survival class again, probably in the spring. Um, might do like a short class on mediumship at some point. We don't have next year's classes planned out for the Ryan Education Center. We'll be planning those out actually at a meeting in a couple of weeks. In fact, I'm going to Durham, North Carolina this coming Friday for a few days. We have a couple of things happening at the Ryan Center, the Ryan Research Center. Not necessarily good in some respects. It's on Saturday next week. We're going to be doing a farewell to our campus walk building, which Ryan has been in since around the year 2000. We are now trying to negotiate. Hopefully, we're going to get our bid in. We've gotten the bid in. We're hoping that the owner of the new space will sell it to us at the money we've got. But we have to move because they sold the building out from under us. We were just leasing space there. But we'll be talking about the next few classes, online classes that'll be offered by the Ryan Education Center. And for those who don't know about the Ryan Education Center, take a look at the website ryanedu.org. That'll show you the classes that are being offered right now. We'll be listing the classes starting in February. The classes next session starts February. We probably won't list them till just either right before Christmas or probably closer to New Year's, maybe right after New Year's. Who might be teaching a course in mediumship? That is a good question. We haven't determined whether that's going to be on the schedule next year. If I am teaching it, I will be bringing in some others to talk about mediumship, including one of the mediums I've worked with. Hopefully getting Julie Beischel to also guest lecture as well. She doesn't know that, but that's my plan if that happens as well. Grief is a process we need. Yeah, but it is a process we need, but there are many things that can mitigate grief, including working with a medium. It doesn't mean you're not grieving. It just means that you can mitigate the actual feeling of that at that time. And Kathy's a witch reverend in Salem, Massachusetts. Cool. That's cool. Paul, I have not seen, I know about the Beyond the Brain series. I certainly can't attend the conference because I'll be in Durham. Assuming I can actually get there, I'm just waiting to see if my flights get canceled coming up this later on. We'll see. Any good scholar researching Wicca, which is in history? There are many really good sources in anthropology and otherwise. It just really depends on what angle you want to take. I don't have those resources at the tip of my tongue or brain at this point because I haven't really done anything much with that. Trying to think where you can actually go for that. Maybe Kathy, if you want to pop up and suggest something, that would be good too. If you send an email to me at either askprofparanormal@gmail.com or just profparanormal@gmail.com, I can try to dig up some things for you as well. And let me know if you're interested in, both Wicca's, witches in general, or the anthropology perspective on witchcraft as well. Let's see here. Scientific spirituality. Oh, okay. I tried to give a link to my video. It didn't work. Title is Poltergeist Science, a Hypothesis for Explaining Strong Telekinesis. Okay, I'll look that up. Julie Beischel's stuff is really great. For those of you who know about grief, there is a grief, she put together a grief card deck for helping people through grief as well. Haven't seen the series Lazarus yet. It's on my list, my watch list at this point. And there's actually a couple of different series called Lazarus too. So there's a new one. So I guess the question is this the time travel series or the brand new one based on Harlan Coben's material that's on Amazon Prime? There's the one that's on Netflix, which is has some sort of time travel element to it, and there's the other one that is just started up on, which is more crime, started up on Amazon Prime. Yeah, that's a good one. Leo Louis Martello. That's a good source. Look up books by that individual as well. Only two of you have hit the like button. Yeah, people hit the like button. That's a good idea. Thank you. Um, let's see. Oh, by the way, the Parapsychological Association, which is just parapsych.org, they are going to be doing a replay of the conference that happened in Germany over the summer, a video replay. And I just bought a ticket. Non-members pay 50, members of the Parapsychological Association pay 25. That's for the entire weekend, a video. So if you're interested in what scientists are doing, that's a good option as well here. Amazon Prime, Crime Mystery. Okay. Yeah, that's on my list too. I have both Lazarus series on my list at this point for that. And Kathy, thank you. Yeah, he was Leo Louis Martello. I've read some. In fact, I probably have some of his books in a different part of my bookcase area here. And let's see what else we have here. Oh, that's been fast and furious here for quite some time. We got about 13 minutes left. And I'm just trying to see here if there's anything else I've missed. So I will say, I'll just mention again, since I know people were coming in later, that the next session will be the November 23rd, and then there'll be two sessions each a week, 2 weeks later so I think it's December 7th and December 21st. And then we're going to skip 3 weeks. So in 2026, I'll be starting on January 11th, and I will have a guest. Steve Gonzalez, who was occasionally with the TV show Ghost Hunters, will be my guest. Steve actually has knowledge of parapsychology, unlike others on that show, who often had no knowledge of anything to do with the history of parapsychology. But that'll be kind of a really good conversation. We'll talk about a bunch of things. All right. What can you say about the Ouija board? Does it actually work? It is the ideomotor response. It is similar. In fact, Ouija board is similar to any form of automatic writing, for that matter. The Ouija board, it was just people were doing that without the board. We're trying to do spirit communication. It was like an afternoon tea thing to do, where people would take cards and spread with letters on them and spread them in a circle. They put a finger on an upturned glass, move the thing around, and ask questions of the spirits. This because spiritualism was really popular in the late 1800s, and this was going on in the U.S., it's going on in the U.K. and France and other places as well. Well, some smart people got together and thought, how can I make money at this? And what they did was actually make a board that they could sell. They patented it. They also patented the use of the planchette, the pointer, which was previously used as an automatic writing device instead of 3 legs. It had 2 legs and a pencil or pen as the first leg. It made kind of unconscious writing a lot easier through ideomotor response. And in essence, there may be psychic information coming through people, but it's coming from you. It's coming through the people who are on the board. And the hugely negative stories we hear, the anecdotal stories we hear about the Ouija board saying negative things, it's mostly coming from teenagers. And part of that's because of expectation. If they want to contact Pazuzu or some demon, the unconscious is going to let them do that. But there's also the possibility, and it's a pretty good possibility, that one of the other teens on the board, or one of the even adults on the board, are screwing with them. And I can say that from personal experience because I did that to my friends. We didn't actually contact demons. We contacted spirits of a Roman gladiator and some other things. Honestly, characters I pulled from comic books, for that matter, which I knew that they had not read. Ouija boards, when they operate properly, are just a form. They're just a form of automatic writing, if that's even going on, of the ideomotor response. Same response you get when you use a pendulum, for that matter. I've got a pendulum right here. So for those of you who know how to use a pendulum, you basically hold the one end in your finger between your thumb and forefinger, and you think of something like think of circle. I am not consciously moving. I am not moving my hand, at least not intentionally. But there are minor muscle impulses that are happening. That's the ideomotor response. And if I want to move back and forth instead, I can do that. Or side to side, it's going to do that. That's the ideomotor response. There's other forms of that you'll see. Dowsing rods work the same way, ideomotor response. Ouija boards, or whatever it's called. And let's remember the Ouija board, the place you normally buy it. Now you buy it on Amazon, but you used to buy it at Toys R Us. Because it's a game. There was a Barbie Ouija board. There is a Stranger Things Ouija board. I have one downstairs, in fact. There's a Wednesday Addams Ouija board. There are also talking boards. There were knockoffs of the Ouija board through the first part of the 20th century, and there's still knockoffs of them. There was a psychic circle board, which I have in my closet, which uses a round planchette, and the board's in a circle with letters and such. And because I guess you're being psychic, it's okay. There's also was an angel board, which supposedly only contacted angels. I have, for those of you who know that comic book and movie Hellboy, I actually have a limited edition Hellboy Bureau of Research, a Bureau of Paranormal Research and Development board with that as well. So there's a ton of stuff out there. It's kind of crazy for what you can actually pull up. I have probably a dozen of those boards here in my home. You can't I mean, how do you properly test a Ouija board for ideomotor? It is ideomotor response. I mean, you want spirits to do it, they need to move the planchette themselves without anybody touching it. All right. You can't really test for spirits unless you get information that seems connected to it, like what we do with mediums. You need to get specific information for somebody you could not possibly have known, and you need to verify it with some family member of that person. That'd be about it. There is a short pamphlet that Hereward Carrington wrote. He was a well-known investigator, also a magician, but wrote a lot of books on parapsychology and psychical research. And if you put in to the Internet Archive text search, that's archive.org, put in Ouija board and the name Carrington, just like it sounds, and you should get to his pamphlet. And it's a pretty interesting thing because it talks all about the ideomotor response and when it might be psychic or something like that with that. So there was an experiment that John Palmer did years ago on the ideomotor response for the Ouija board, and it did seem to be ideomotor in nature for that. Again, that doesn't mean that the person's not coming through with some psychic information in the unconscious that's causing it to move, but it definitely was ideomotor in nature in terms of the actual movement for that. And beside my Hellboy board, I actually was at a science fiction convention not too long ago and bought a board, a homemade board that has the TARDIS on it for Doctor Who fans. So it is a Time Lord board, talking board. I guess I would end up talking to the spirits of the Time Lords, hopefully not the Daleks, for those of you who know anything about Doctor Who. Okay. I have also a religiously, I can't say insulting, but possibly a board that would kind of cause people to react negatively, which is a very funny board called, I'll just leave it at this. Look up Holy Spirit Games. That's all I'll say. You may be offended, but there's some very funny video there. And I have the board, the Holy Spirit board as well. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, and so Bolt and string. Yeah. I mean, anything you don't have to buy a pendulum, by the way. You can just get a string and get a nut, like a hardware nut, put it at the end. That's a nice heavy thing. You can put a ring on a string. It shouldn't be a very light ring. It should be have some heft to it. Put it on a string, put it on a chain, hold one end between your fingers, thumb and forefinger, and and just ask questions. And by the way, that can be used in some ways to find lost things around your house. You can't remember where you put something. You can use that to find it because you know where you put it, even if you can't remember where you put it. So Gallifrey Falls, no more board. Right. Um, Familiar with Spider-Man spider sense? Yeah. How his precognition works so inconsistently across the decades. Personally, as I recall, it depends on which iteration of Spider-Man you're talking about, but it's a danger sense. So, or something was going to directly affect him. And that was something that was coming, but it might not have been precognition. It might have been more of a picking up what's in the thoughts of someone else, someone planning on attacking, for example. Although there were some events there that might have indicated a little bit of precognitive as well with Spider-Man. Of course, then you have Daredevil, who can perceive the world because of a radar sense. Lost his physical sight, but he can still pick up things. And by the way, there are people who are able to navigate, blind people who have learned to echolocate, basically make clicks and navigate around like a bat. And there are folks out there who teach that to people too. So we have capacities. We might not have a spider sense, but we might have Matt Murdock's Daredevil's radar sense in some way, echolocation in some way. All right. Anybody else have any pop culture references, other ones we can kind of talk about here? And by the way, I will mention, we're talking about those paper targets turning with Martin Caidin. There is some footage out there out on the web about Caidin doing this. There's a new documentary that's going to be coming out. I think it already premiered, but I'm not sure when it's going to go online about the man who created the $6 Million Man, about Martin Caidin, and that'll have some bits about his PK. But there's also an old movie, 1968, a movie called The Power, which is on a bunch of the free streaming services, I believe. And that starred George Hamilton, Suzanne Pleshette, Michael Rennie. There were a group of faculty members at a university, one of whom, an older guy, Arthur O'Connell, said he's discovered that one of this group is a mutant, like 100,000 years ahead of us all, and he doesn't think that person's going to do well, but has psychic powers and all sorts of stuff. And so he brings out this little paper tent on a spindle and has everybody individually focus on it to show who is doing this, who this mutant is. And then he realizes, well, of course, he's not going to want to give him away. So everybody focus on it, and the thing starts spinning. And it's about the hunt for which of the people are that individual. It's got a really cool ending to it as well. So I highly recommend that one because it is about psychic powers in this way. All right. Let's see. Graveyard Grug, is that bounty on the shark in cash or check? What bounty on what shark? All right. So we are now at a minute out. Thank you all for attending. Please tell your friends if they have nothing better to do on a Sunday evening, one Sunday evening, spend a little time either listening to other people's questions and my responses, and or something else. But thank you all for coming. Just a reminder that I do have a website. It's just lloydauerbach.com. Remember, Lloyd is spelled with one L, and my books are there, and some other stuff as well. Some resources. Definitely look at the resources page. And if you're interested in other podcasts that I do as a guest, articles, there were 3 articles that came out at the end of October, including one from Cosmopolitan UK. There are links to those articles that are on my media page, so you can find a lot of stuff there. Thoughts on releasing an audio-only version of this podcast? That's a good question. We haven't done that. Certainly can do that because I can easily get that from Zoom. Maybe I'll think about putting that up available on my website. That's a good idea. Now that we're doing Zoom instead of the old platform we used to use, I can start doing that. So we'll work that out. Hopefully by next time I'll have that worked out. But that's a great idea. Thanks. All right, everybody. Have a great couple of weeks. I'll see you the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I'm going to be coming back on the 20th from North Carolina, assuming my flights are not canceled. What a world. We'll see you then. Good night.